27.
26.
25 seconds.
24. 23.
22 seconds.
21 seconds.
20 seconds. 19.
18. 17 seconds.
16.
15 seconds.
14.
13 seconds.
12. 11.
10 seconds.
9.
8. 7. 6. Copy.
5 seconds.
3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Subspace Chatter, the show where we boldly go into discussing Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Today, we'll be talking about the 8th episode of the new series, The Elysian Kingdom. Let's go through some introductions. My name is Vanessa, and I host a YouTube channel called I Love Bad Star Trek. Dan, you go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dan, editor-in-chief of warpfactortrack.com and former long-time admin of Memory Alpha.
Hi, I'm Brad, and I have no channels whatsoever.
I guess I'll go next. I'm Glenn, and I'm an IT professional who was inspired by Star Trek, which came out the year I was born.
And I'm Scott, host of the YouTube channel Opinions No One Cares About.
Okay, let's get started with the questions about this episode. There was a lot going on, very different tone. The beginning started out with pointing out why changing the landscape of a story can cheapen its effect by giving a conveniently happy ending. Why would the ending break its own rule, do you think? Because M'Benga makes a very, strong point about not changing the ending to the book he's reading because, the choice at the end is sort of the point of it. And when he's faced at the end with a choice, it's just, they give him the easy third option, Deus Machina. What do you think, Dan?
I think it's cool that Tobias is joining us today.
Yeah. Hi, Tobias. Okay, Scott.
Well, obviously it probably needed to change. I think it needed to change a little bit because it was, when M'Benga realized that, it was changing the way his daughter had mentioned that she wanted earlier in the show. Where's it going with this? I think maybe he was just realizing that, he was in the story and he knew it was going to happen, but if it could be changed, then he could change it to his advantage. And, the entire time, he was trying to find his daughter, maybe he was thinking in the back of his mind that, well, no, he's probably just thinking that he's just wanted to save her because, they made the point of saying that the longer she was out of the transporter buffer, the worse it was going to be for her. So maybe to that end, he was just trying to end it as soon as possible and find her so he could get her back where he knew she'd be safe.
What do you think, Brad?
I think it was well executed thematically because he said to her that when she grew up, she would be able to rewrite or write her own story and write her own ending. And through the episode, he had to figure out where this story was going, and all the little breadcrumbs were there. And at the very end, he gave her the choice of how the story was going to end. And I think that was the broader kind of theme, or the broader kind of moral of the story, right? That if he told her that she could write her own ending, she gets older, whatever, then he has to allow her to make that decision, right? She could stay with him and lose the health and the security of the fantasy, or whatever the alien entity was providing, or she could go and live and be healthy, and so he had to let go. But it wasn't his story that she was writing; it was her own, and he had to let her have that.
Glenn?
Excellent. I agree with everything Brad said, but I would say that it still wasn't necessarily going to be a happy ending because she had to choose between being with her father and being with this other entity. It wound up being a happy ending, but that wasn't necessarily going to be the case. But also out of universe explanation is the fact that this is Strange New Worlds. It's hopeful, it's episodic, it's not serialized, and they'd already gone on a very long time with this serialized story with the daughter. So it was time for it to come to a resolution.
Right. I think that somebody in the writer's room went, we are absolutely not going to take this child's life. We already have a dead kid in the series. We're not going to do this again. Because there was also the option possibly that Mabenga at great personal sacrifice could, keep her alive. And that option was not taken either. So I think someone in the writer's room was like, we got to come up with another happy ending. We got to make this happy somehow. So it sort of undoes the rule that was established in the start. And that to me was odd. Anyway, why didn't I'm sorry?
I was just going to say, I don't think it, for Mabenga, it's perspective. It's situational, right? From Mabenga's perspective, he had to sacrifice, right? And he still had to sacrifice. She wasn't there at the end, but he was hopeful. And that moment of hope holds true to the story, even though he had to sacrifice and let her go. And she had to hope that he was going to, with her not there, was still going to find happiness, right? He made her promise. She made him promise. And how can you really promise to be happy? It's still hopeful, even though it's a bittersweet kind of story, bittersweet arc that this story was on.
I thought it was interesting that you said like that she doesn't pass away, and technically, yeah, she doesn't at the end. But also, like, I found it interesting that there was a person who commented on the review article for this episode on warfactortrack.com who was saying that they, in their perception of the episode, they could see it's a bit like they took from it that it could be a bit analogous to that she ends up in heaven or in an afterlife.
Yeah, that it's a very ephemeral, very kind of nebulous kind of non-corporeal existence, right? And they've had that trope in previous series,
like Kess and Voyager. I believe there was an episode where Picard got blown out of the front of the ship and became one with a nebula at one point. That was wacky.
But even that earlier episode where the child is sacrificed for the civilization, right? The child still made their choice. And of course, people would argue that the child really didn't make a choice because he was educated to think that was a necessary sacrifice. So it was a little brainwashing, a little bit of, convenient, treatment of the child's faith. Maybe they didn't really know what was happening, what was going to happen. They weren't fully knowledgeable. So there is a little bit of that contrast with the exploitation of the child, right? But in both of those stories, I would say that it was culturally, right, from the perspective of the alien civilization, they were doing what was right and it was okay. And from this kind of culture, it's the same. Mabenga had to sacrifice, had to give up. And it's just situational, contextualized.
I find that interesting as well because I wouldn't consider like the entity and the anomaly to have a culture. It just seems because it says that it's lonely, like Rukia was, and it felt her loneliness.
Right. I meant the kind of attitudes of the Federation, the attitudes that Mabenga had. Right. Okay. From his perspective and from everything that the Federation has taught him, it's a sacrifice, and he's a dad looking after his daughter, and how do you give up your child to give them possibly a better opportunity? And it's just this constant push and pull. So I see those two episodes as kind of related in context. Right?
Why didn't Hemmer flip out about the daughter and the pattern buffer? Because in an earlier episode, he discovered that there was a malfunction as a result of power being allocated to the pattern buffer, but he doesn't know why. Una knows why. But then in this episode, he's introduced to Rakia, being in the pattern buffer, even though she's not there. So now Hemmer knows. So I'm just like, how is it that this is just fine to him? And he's not like, hey, so you were the one that like screwed up the ship. I thought that was like a massive hole that they just breezed right by.
Well, didn't he at the end, didn't he lose his knowledge of everything that transpired in those 5 hours?
No, it was just him and Mabenga that were not automatons.
Yeah, true. During the episode, but at the end, he wakes up on the bed and he says, "What was Mabenga says, what's the last thing you remember?" And he says,
"Right,
entering the nebula."
But what I'm saying is, like, even when they're both in that situation together, they're not, they're not under the influence of the book. So I'm wondering, like, or the entity or whatever it is. So, like, why in that moment he's just completely copacetic?
Well, because he just had his uniform materialize into a wizard's uniform, and there's plants growing out of the sides of the hallways, and he's got people walking around going, "Yes, my lord," and "How are you, my lord?" and "How dare you, sir?" Shink. I think there were other things on his mind.
Yeah, he does say gets dragged away, saying everybody's lost their minds.
Help me.
Yeah, in the moment it makes sense, but it is a good question.
Yeah, I have to agree.
I think he'd probably just spank him afterwards. Mabenga would just get a spanking afterwards.
Yeah, Hemmer seems like a no-nonsense kind of person. He wants to analyze and take care of the situation at hand. Then after that's taken care of, then move on from there.
Right. Makes sense. Just remaining pragmatic in the thick of it.
You called it you said it's a pretty big hole.
I think it's a pretty, yeah.
So
I do. Because I would think that, he would say something. He would say something about the entire ship being in danger because of his recklessness. I think he would say something. Like, he wouldn't like completely stop what he's doing, but he would be like, so about that time that you did that,
But didn't you find Hemmer during this episode? I mean, after the first moment of seeing him and kind of like he's freaking out, going, "Help me! I don't know. I understand what the hell's going on." And then as he's rescued and all the rest, the character seems to have a little more liberation in the emotion that they're expressing that we hadn't seen before. So it's maybe they were just going in a different direction because they wanted to, again, give more information about the character that we know he's already firm. We know that he's a typical engineer, right?
I guess they just don't want to beat us over the head with that.
Maybe.
How would you? What? Go ahead, Scott.
I was thinking. I did find it interesting that when Hemmer was like getting into it, like he made a really good fairy tale wizard, considering he's Andorian, and to the best of my knowledge, they don't have fairy tales. Like he was all about being the wizard caster. Like
he started playing, right?
Yeah, and you know what got me with that? I watched a show with the subtitles on, so when everybody's calling him caster, they spelled it with an E, and I'm just like, wait a minute, they call him caster like spell caster? Because that seems like lazy writing. But then we found out later it's actually a reference to Castor and Pollux, and it's like, oh, it's not lazy writing, it's lazy subtitle.
It's interesting how the characters sort of transposed from the book onto the crew. Definitely. Really enjoyed Pike as a coward as well. That was really funny. How would you feel if, like Rakia in this episode, the writers wanted to change the ending of the story for Pike with him surviving the accident that results in him in a wheelchair? I would be fine with that. I want more Strange New Worlds. That would be fine. I'm cool with it. What do you guys think about canon breaking for that?
Well, they already created the Kelvin timeline with the new movies, so they do this and Strange New Worlds keeps going, and that's just creating the Pike timeline. I'm good with that.
And they've given him 10 years, right? So maybe in 4 years we won't want to see any more Strange New Worlds. You know,
I
maybe
doubt that.
Well,
Yeah, I'm okay with canon bending, not necessarily canon breaking. If there is a canon bending, then maybe it's an alternate universe episode. You know, Pike gets to go off and have a happy ending. But if it's in the prime timeline, I wouldn't be okay with it.
well, and if they went into the his existence post going to the planet and being with the woman, I forget their names now.
Vina and the Elysians.
Yes. So if we end up seeing, right, life post that, where they allow him to continue on his journeys and it's all fiction, it's all make believe, right? I could see there'd be a little opportunity there, but it would get kind of stale because there's no real stakes to the characters, and then they can take all kinds of liberties because it's all, you know, a dream that's being created from his mind.
Unless they say, well, you can still die in your dream and, you know, still have all the repercussions that you would have in reality, a bit like how, you know, like even being on a holodeck, you can turn off the safeties, you know.
True. Death and resurrection.
I don't know why they even let you do that. I don't even know why they would give you the ability to turn it off. It's so weird.
Because if you want to be stupid about it, who's going to stop you?
Which of the main cast members do you think performed the best in this episode? I really, really enjoyed Uhura. Loved the mean evil queen character she's given. She kills it. She is just fully in it. That's by far my favorite. What do y'all think?
Personally, I'd go with Pike and La'an, who played what are essentially their polar opposites to the hilt, and it was perfect. I absolutely loved it. Those two deserve, honestly, I think those two deserve Emmys for their performances.
What about you, Glenn?
I'm not sure if I actually have a favorite, although Lon did kind of steal the show, the scenes that she was in. But I actually like the fact that we've had enough character development in just these 7 episodes before now that we could actually tell who was being the polar opposite of the other, who was being like an enhanced version of themselves. For example, Una and Ortegas, they are just enhanced versions of themselves. But we can see that Pike and La'an and Uhura are all kind of polar opposites. And I love the fact that they actually played with the character interaction in that way. And you can actually tell just watching the finished product that they had a lot of fun producing this episode.
I thought it was interesting that they changed the gender for Ortegas. And also rewatching it today, like the portrayal of that Uhura delivers as Queen Nev was reminding me of Queen Arachnia from Voyager. But I think my favorite is probably Hammer as Castor. Although having said that, I saw him before this episode was released. I saw like there was a clip from this episode and like trailers and stuff like that, and I was like really excited because I thought it was not Hammer but another Enar, and I thought, oh, that's maybe a return to Andoria and a return of the Enar, but no, we didn't get that in this episode.
I just have a tiny little question about Hammer. He's in the dungeon, right? With that screwdriver. Why didn't he just use that before everybody else got locked up? Like, why didn't he just try to escape? Like, why didn't he just do that with the bars? Why did he wait until everybody was in jail with him to... I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just...
Well, it's kind of like the same thing. It's kind of like the same thing I was asking last episode. Like, where was he when, you know, the Orions or the space pirates were taking over the ship? Because it's kind of the same thing. Like, yeah, he could have been escaping, trying to figure out what was going on.
I think Anson Mount did a really great job of you know, playing the character, and there were little things that they allowed him to, you know, the skill of, you know, communicating non-verbally in those moments, subtly,
very mugging
over the
he was
top,
mugging.
right?
a lot.
Yeah, but it wasn't over the top. It wasn't
Mhm.
like wasn't ham-fisted. There was some subtlety to what he was doing, and even little sounds and little utterances that he had. Those weren't. I really doubt they were scripted. I imagine that was him just filling in the void to enrich the character, and he didn't distract. Right? I mean, he's a talented actor, and you saw in those moments he's in the background. If he's playing it even more energetic, he's going to draw your eye in the frame, right? But even when he was playing background, he was subtle, and he continued to be alive. And that's what a good actor does. But it was just done subtly, and I think. At first, when I've watched the episode, I think 3 times, and the first time around, I was wondering, well, how come Leon isn't the guard, right? Because that would from the character perspective, it would have fit with her role, right? And then I realized that it's actually they were playing with kind of character, and they were playing with acting, and they were playing with some of those kind of breaking type, if you will, right, from what we know, and they were trying to fill out and augment. And the parts that I loved the most about the princess was when she broke from being the princess, and it was like, oh yeah, that's right, good, that's a good plan, she went back to the Leon accent and kind of had that moment. You're right. I think they did have a lot of fun. But and to answer your question, I think maybe Hemmer was kind of waiting to see what the hell's going on, because right, he's locked up. He can get out anytime he wants, but it's best if he kind of collects himself and tries to figure out what's spinning this world before he tries to go out and interact with it. Right?
That's a good point. Do you think the Swamp of Infinite Deaths contains any rodents of unusual size? It's a Princess Bride oriented question. I would think so. Targs, something like that.
I would think that they would contain every sci-fi and fantasy trope imaginable.
Right.
Yeah, I was watching something that said, every good fantasy story should have a swamp, whether it's, the Fire Swamp or the Swamp of Infinite Sadness, or the Swamp of, Infinite Sadness.
If we lost another Artax, I don't think I could have continued.
It seemed like it was a little nod to, well, I mean, all the fantasy series and all that kind of stuff, and it actually even touches on some TOS and some of the same kinds of things that were revisited in TNG, right? And of course Voyager. They've all had their moment of playing with these kinds of narrative, kind of fantasy elements. But
right, like
it's almost like
episode on the holodeck where they were in the Robin Hood, or wasn't a holodeck thing, that was Q deciding that they're just in
Cupid. Yeah.
So
or,
I was
I'll never remember.
Oh, it was Cupid.
I was just thinking that it's almost there's a lot of modern storytelling on whatever streaming services you're using, but LARPing has become quite popular, right? And you see it. I mean, I saw it in the Hawkeye series that was on Disney Plus, and there's a couple other ones now. God's Favorite Idiot on Netflix. There's a lot of LARPing content where it's escapism. It's people using escapism to break from the realities of their lives, and they try to embrace characters that are not like themselves, right? So I wonder if some of that is also like a wink, wink, nod, nod to D&D or live action roleplay.
That's very true. I agree with that. Yeah. Did you appreciate the return of Hammer Time in this episode?
I think you know I did by now. I think I've mentioned enough how much of a Hammer fan I am. And not only to see him back, but to see him, getting into his role and going way over the top. Like all the strange gesturing and he's doing right before he transports everybody away. That was brilliant. I love that.
Yeah, Hemmer being like a wizard makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Sorry, Glenn. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yes, he's the wizard, he's the engineer, but I like the fact that he's actually gotten a chance to get more character growth in this episode. Whether he's going to remember it or not is another story. But yeah, I really appreciated the fact that we had a nice character growth and the fact that he was able to really get into his role. And I was afraid it was going to go over the top, but they actually managed to keep it under control.
It was nice to see the there's a lot of little tongue-in-cheek stuff going on, right? But when Hemmer breaks out of uses that torch to break open the gate on the cage, right? The cage door. Just the little exchange of I like this science. The idea that to an unknowledgeable person, science seems magical, right? So it looked like magic. He was performing magic because no one could have a context for it. So what was scientific from this idea of, the future Star Trek, to somebody, it could have appeared magical. It's like our devices, right? You put our device in front of someone who's never seen electricity, and they're going to be like, "What the hell is this magic?"
Yeah, Arthur C. Clarke said that, didn't he?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, go ahead. You were about to say something.
I was going to say Arthur C. Clarke said it. But I enjoyed seeing Hammer back. And regarding the swamp stuff, I thought it reminded me of like B-movie stuff and Doctor Who, sort of, because Doctor Who had quite a few swamps going on and stuff as well.
Yes.
I think it would be fun to see an episode called Hemmer Back, where he becomes the hero of some kind of action, some kind of physical altercation between, right? It's like he's hammering them back. He's taking charge.
I do.
And, looking.
Sorry, go ahead.
And looking back, Dan, like the tool that Hemmer used to break out of that cell did look suspiciously like a sonic screwdriver.
True, that's true. But I do have a question about that too, because the whole for me was his whole outfit changed.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing he had, like everyone else seemed to, their uniform, everything seemed to morph and change into the tools and the attire of the period. How did he end up having a sonic screwdriver or a tool just conveniently in his boot? Right? How did that happen? Is that, to me, it broke from the reality of he wakes up, he's now completely garbed in whatever uniform of the age or whatever how you want to say it. I don't know how the tool ended up in his pocket. I mean, I can imagine it. He picked it up on when he was being accosted and shoved it in his boot, right? But without seeing that moment, it was a little bit of a disconnect for me.
My headcanon was that the characters in the story had no idea what any of the technology was. So just in the area that they made into the dungeon, it just happened to be, the tool just happened to be laying on one of the consoles, and he just grabbed it because nobody else thought to take it away from him.
Yeah, like kind of the way he grabbed the communicator later and tied it into the transporters.
Exactly.
Hang on a second. What's your opinion of how the effect of Hemmer being influenced and possessed by the entity looked? I love articulated antennae. Like I missed that so much from Enterprise with Shran emoting with his antenna. So I was like, oh my God, it's coming back. But no, it's just for the possession, which I thought was interesting.
I thought they handled that beautifully. The way they did the vocalizations, the way he had different expressions on his face from when he's normally talking. I thought they actually handled that extremely well.
I really didn't like the transformation part, but as you said, the vocalizations you mentioned, I really liked the vocalizations and the fact the audio effect they put on that. But yeah, I just thought, like, to me it seemed a bit too sort of, I don't know what it's. I was trying to think, like, trying to put my finger on why I find it problematic. When he's actually, taken over by the entity and channeled, channeling the entity. Yeah, it just didn't look that good to me.
We're talking about Hemmer and
Yeah, Hemmer's possession. Or
I didn't. Sorry, I didn't. What I found awkward about it was him turning and stumbling to the bed, right? And I couldn't tell if he was face up or face down when he stumbled and hit the bed, right? It just seemed like, how did he? I mean, I know he's got extrasensory perception and all that, but it just didn't. That whole moment of him collapsing, finding a soft spot to land, instead of just slumping down, and collapsing where he was. That was the part that kind
so
of,
the block,
again,
so like the blocking, the way
blocking
that
of it,
they,
yeah.
Sorry. Has Mabenga ever thought about reading his daughter a different story? Because the whole episode starts with her being like, can I change the ending? No. Can we, any like, they have, it's the Enterprise. They presumably have like an infinite library of books. Like, why is it so important that she hear this one story in this one version for as long as they have this time together? Like, I just thought it was a strange thing to have such strong convictions about.
Well, isn't the him reading the story in the same story a metaphor for the existence that she shares with him as he's hunting for the cure?
No,
right?
I understand it as like a function of the episode itself, but I'm just saying, like, the daughter, it's just practically speaking, as like somebody who interacts with children, not that I do, but like if a kid goes, hey, can I hear another story? Is it really that difficult to find a different book? Like, there's
No, but some parents see the story as tradition, right? And they explore the story for the deeper context and meanings. As the kid gets older, they revisit the same story. And Scott, I'm sure you have kids, right? So you know that you have kind of favorites that you kind of prefer. And I imagine Mabenga doesn't want to let go of the story because he likes it and had fun with it, and to let go of the story is like letting go of her and the tradition of her and having her, right? So it could be that's his heroic journey.
Mhm.
It's just a tool to get there.
And it could be, yes, I assume you're right, Vanessa. They probably have a lot of books, but it occurs to me they'd probably be like stored virtually to save space. And the fact that this one is like a hardcover suggests to me that it probably has like a personal connection. Like he probably had this book when he was a kid.
I wish they talked about that. Like, does this story hold meaning to him beyond simply just reading it to his daughter over and over?
Well, and to us, it doesn't. Never. I mean, to them, the way they portrayed it, it didn't make any difference. But to us, as the audience, we're seeing, people who are not Eurocentric in their appearance, right? Being presented as the kings and the rulers and the combatants of their story, and there's an added kind of quality there that's telling us something as the audience, but not really telling us something.
So I was
right?
thinking it sort of could potentially be, like said, to tie in with like the racism that Benny Russell, who we see as the author of the book at the start of this episode, he encounters racism in Far Beyond the Stars.
Yeah,
That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that
Yeah.
up.
yeah. Nice
And this
Easter
whole thing
egg, for
kind of
sure.
this whole thing kind of seemed like a reference to that episode, to Far Beyond the Stars, because you've got the characters that we know and recognize, but they're playing entirely different people.
That's legit. How did everyone feel about the wink, wink, nudge, nudge tone of the dialogue between the knight and the huntress? I don't like that they hint at, oh, we know each other really well. Like, we're post discovery. We don't have to hint at things. We can just say, oh, we're dating. We don't have to make it like a cute joke. It's like queer relationships aren't a joke. Like, I don't care for that personally.
I thought, like, rewatching it today, I thought, well, I didn't really have much of a problem with it, because they could just have, it's not necessarily relationships, sort of sexual sort of stuff. It could be like a very strong friendship that they have.
I found
Yeah.
So go ahead, Scott.
Sorry. Like, I do see where you're coming from, Vanessa, but I don't think they were thinking about that. Like, they literally establish it as, the point when Mbenga realizes that the story that he knows is being changed. And I think they were only using it as that. I don't know if they were thinking about the deeper implications of it.
I found it awkward. Not in the context that, those relations are awkward. Not that kind of context at all, but rather this is a story that's being created by his daughter, and there was her imagination, what she's wanted, right, to the story, because he says she's wanted them to kind of meet. I think that's what Mbenga's character, or Mbenga, says, right? That was his first clue that there was something wrong in the story, but they alluded to a sexual relationship, a carnal relationship. They knew each other very well, if you know what I mean.
But
that to me seems but that to me seemed a little bit awkward if it was coming from the child's mind.
But also, as well, like, we know that, like, the character that Ortega is playing is male, so as in the full reality of the story, is a heterosexual relationship if sex is involved.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Even so, how we would perceive the relationship,
right?
But even internally, I found it interesting that they would take it to that kind of not just be friends, but be more than friends.
I think it also, like, if we're talking about, different roles and different races in fantasy stories and people seeing themselves in stories, that could also be, like, how many fantasy stories center around heterosexual couplings, and why not, like, somebody have the imagination to imagine something else? That's one way to look at it. But I'm a little confused by the perception that Ortegas was playing a man. I didn't get that at all. I didn't see it.
Okay.
And call her sir, but that could be a woman's title as well. So I don't.
Yeah, like Savik.
Right.
But what was I going to say? No, I can't remember. Sorry.
But I think, as Scott alluded to, that the fact that they were having a relationship was the point in the story at which Mbenga realized that we weren't following the story as it was written. We were following the story as she wanted it to be. That was a primary point there. Any sexual innuendos or anything like that are just kind of a wink nod for adults in the audience, just to have a little snicker at it, I think. I don't think it was overtly meant to be that way.
Thanks, Glenn, because you reminded me of what I was meaning to say, which is that, as Brad said, it is like a story told through the eyes of the child, who, is not au fait with sexual relationships, obviously.
So this is the second episode in a row to feature Pike with a flat hairstyle. So are you like, where's the peak, man? Or do you think it makes a nice change?
He had two peaks. They were just below his hairline.
He was hiding it this time. I thought it was, I think that the middle part, I think it's a good demonstration of how the middle part doesn't work for everybody. Like,
maybe it was a nod to Twin Peaks.
That's strange. Your
I
world's
hope
become
not.
Twin Peaks.
You were working on that one for a while, weren't you, Glenn?
About 10 seconds.
They've already included. Wasn't the the guy that played Kovic in Discovery? Wasn't he in Twin Peaks?
Was Cronenberg in Twin Peaks?
I thought it was.
David Lynch
don't
was,
think
but
so.
David Lynch
right,
was, but he
okay.
created it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question? I got
Question
distracted
was
there.
like, are you happy with his hairstyle changing up over the episodes? Like, he's not just sporting the peak; he's sporting other things like a middle part, or messed up hair when he was on the Serene Squall.
I think it was because they've been tracking fan reactions to things, and now it becomes just what are we going to do now to keep the fans interested in his hair?
Pike's hair is the Tribble of the Strange New Worlds universe.
That's right.
I
Or
think
the Shatner hairpiece.
it would be too difficult for them to track fan reactions because this was, of course, like there's quite a lag time between like when this episode was produced and like when it's released in the US.
Right.
You don't
like,
think there was a crew member somewhere going, how come his hair keeps getting so tall? Oh, sorry. Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry, people. Carry on.
Yeah,
Right,
I've been under the impression that the entire cast and crew consists of Trekkies. So the reactions of the crew are going to be the reactions of the fans. It's going to be an accurate reflection.
I don't necessarily think the cast were aware too much of Star Trek before getting cast. Like, I don't think Ortega, the person who plays the Nurse Chapel, was a Trekkie or anything. I don't necessarily think. Yeah. So, but they were like welcomed into the cast and to the Trek family and everything. But as far as them being Trekkies themselves, I don't necessarily think that was necessarily the case for all of them.
There's some boom operator somewhere like looking at everything that's happening going, yeah, that's canon, that's not canon. And there's some gaffer somewhere going, oh, look at that. That's going to cause a problem.
I think it's when I just found out about Jas Bush, I thought like that seems to have been to her strength, I think, and to a certain extent, because it means that I think it gives her a degree of freedom in that she's not tied to like emulating exactly how she saw Chapel in her youth or whatever. She can play it in a different way.
I agree completely. I think it's extremely liberating to just not have that background and just have the freedom to make decisions as you see the character versus how Majel Barrett played the character.
Isn't there a difference? I'm just going to say, isn't there a difference between how one is in our youth and how we are as adults, and then how we are in later, toward the middle age years, so you mature and you change. So there's some freedom in playing a younger character, but because you have the source material to look at as to where you're going, how you travel, how you get there, that route, that's the fun of it, right? Otherwise you create a brand new character that has no connection to the original. And I don't know if that's what they're aiming for, because they're aiming for something prior to what we knew. They have some source material to work towards that helps them kind of see where the character is developing.
As Chamberlain Roth, Pike calls for a court jester and then dismisses that request. If you could make any Star Trek character, past or present, serve that function in the story, which one would it be? I love this question.
Quark.
I was thinking more along the lines of Barclay, because he'd be a natural.
Oh man.
Yeah, but Barclay was a foolish character by accident. He wasn't, right. He was the comic relief because he was tragic, not so much in the
Aren't all comedians have a dark center? Doesn't their comedy come from pain?
Yeah, but he wasn't trying to be funny.
Right.
Quark, he's that outgoing, buffoonish kind of character. As long as he's getting what he gets, he's happy.
I think it's a question where there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe I'd say like one of the Wadi from Move Along Home that was at Quark. That might be fun.
I
They're
heard
a
somewhere
little
somebody for like
single-minded for me. They're just like, we like games, we're gonna play them. Where are the games? And they're like gamers, but stereotyped gamers. Anyway, I'm sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
well, for the purpose of this episode, somebody I'd watched or listened to somewhere suggested Kyle, which would have been good. But personally, I would have wanted to see George Kirk. I would have wanted to see Pike be like, summon the court jester. No, not that one. The one with the mustache.
And he walks in, he falls. Right? Yep.
He is good at his job.
I would choose Data personally because I love my favorite parts. Some of my favorite bits that Data does is when he's trying to tell a joke. And even Joe Piscopo, who's awful, who's a terrible comedian to me, can't help him. But I love his sense of humor. I love how I think he's hilarious. Go ahead, Glenn.
Oh, I was just going to agree with you. When you said Joe Piscopo, I automatically went to Johnny Dangerously, which is one of my favorite films of all time.
How about Crusher, Wesley Crusher?
That might have to do more with his outfits, than his actual sense of humor, personally. In her character, Nurse Chapel detects pain in King Ridley and / Mabenga's spirit. Do you think this might be some indication that she might join forces with Sybok? Dan, can you explain that one a little bit more? I'm not making the connection quite.
Well, you know how Cyborg talks about everyone has their own pain. Share your pain.
Mm-hmm.
All the rest of it. Chapel struck me as like she talks about like when she's scanning King Mbanga playing King Ridley, basically, and she's like, "Oh, you have pain in your spirit." I was like, and we've already seen, obviously, Cyborg introduced previously in Strange New Worlds,
right?
So I thought, like, are those two like story threads going to tie up or not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might actually be an in for a future episode or a two story arc or 2-episode arc, right? Where Chapel's what appears to be the stronger empathy that she has, right? And she deals with maybe some of her empathy through humor, right? Through the kind of casualness of her interactions with people, but she's very, very personable, right? She's very affable. So maybe there's an empathic quality there that we're hinting at in this episode that they'll bring up, and that'll obviously be a connection or something to be exploited in future episodes with Sybok. And exploited, I don't mean in the sense of she's going to be exploited, but rather it's an access point for the writers to create some kind of connection, some kind of interaction that relates and can be justified. That's what I meant.
Where she kind of sees things from his perspective a little bit, like, because the best villains have a point. The best villains have some kind of
humanity to it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, but she does say to Spock, right? Don't be afraid. She says at some point, right, to be sincere or something about being who you are in one of the last few episodes, right? Be true to who you are, right? Which is, as Dan said, it's very enticing, and it seems to be almost asking him to be more understanding of his human side as well as his Vulcan side. So maybe she'll see Sybok and feel more a connection to him because he's embracing part of himself or embracing, a human qualities that she appreciates in Spock. So maybe there'll be some kind of confusion or tension there. Yeah, so I'd see that would be a good thing to mine perhaps in future episodes, Dan, for sure.
I thought it was mainly just Nurse Chapel giving sort of extra voice to the, obvious conflicting, pain about his daughter, that it's always weighing on him, that it's, this episode started with him obsessively focusing on the cure to try to help his daughter, and it's just always weighing on him. That's how I interpreted it personally, but I definitely see where you're coming from with that one.
And side note, that was a brilliant distraction when the stuff blew up in his face and he was thinking that was what was causing everything. Because I actually believe that right up until you realize it's the nebula doing it.
Which character in this episode has your favorite costume? I think that La'an, her costume is just stupendous. It's just so, I mean, she posted on Twitter of her twirling in that dress. It's just such a huge, over the top ball gown that I think most femme folks would not have a problem wearing.
All the costumes are so great. All the costumes are so great, but for different reasons. And you've got Uhura, who is basically in this really powerful and strong and sharp, yet feminine, right? And practically falling out of her
right.
outfit.
I love
right?
that it looked like armor, like the collar looked like armor. That was
right.
Really
so there was
awesome.
this edge to it, and then the Pike's character, right? This flappy little cape that he was constantly brandishing, like it's just wings and plumage, right? It's like, woohoo, look at me, I'm a and then the ones that I liked though were the ones that were very utilitarian, like the Ortega's character, right? She had a what would be appropriate for a soldier or a fighter of that sort. And yeah, I think my favorite would have been Ortega's, although Chapel's it was beautifully constructed. It was just beautifully constructed. They'd be favorites, but I do really, really, really appreciate the way they dressed the daughter, both in her young self and then her old self. And they honored kind of a cultural heritage there with the pieces that around the neck, and the
beading was really stunning.
The beading, yeah, it was just it was really nice to include those things for sure.
What do you think, Scott? Or I'm sorry, Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, either one of us. But I thought that they were all beautifully done and that they were all tailored to the characters that they were playing. That was my favorite part of the whole thing. Although I do have to say that I really loved Mbenga's crown, and I really loved all the embellishments on Hemmer's outfit. So I think I'm leaning toward Hemmer as my favorite.
I'd say I enjoyed. Was Ortega's? I'm thinking back about it. Was her costume all black? Because technically that does make her the Man in Black. No?
No.
Oh,
no.
Never mind.
It was kind of like a forest green, deep, rich greens,
right?
Blues, grays.
I did like Una's thing with the hood so that she could reveal herself as the Huntress. And of course the reference to the nameless sort of cannon fodder soldiers all wearing red, the Crimson Guard. Like, oh, even in medieval times we have red shirts. Okay.
I think my favorite was Hammer. And then thinking back, I was remembering like the question you asked previously, which was like who might be good as court jester. I think my pick would probably be T'Pring. I just realized, because I thought like a humorous character can, I think, be extremely effective if they're like really deadpan.
She does get really great one-liners, so I agree with that one. And sorry, I didn't mean to like skip over you or anything, but
dry sardonic humor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can I make something? We talked a little bit about Mbenga and the gas, explosion there. I really didn't like that sequence where he's crushing up the herbs and the minerals, and he's mixing it, and it it just seems like it's
Out of place.
silly. It just seems silly.
A little too
And I
mad
don't-
scientist.
So like out of place because it's the 23rd century and he's using a mortar and pestle.
Well, it's in the middle of, he's got all this computer bank and he's got all these other technological wonders, and he's doing something the old-fashioned way, and I can appreciate that. But most of those jars that he had on his desk were freestanding, right? They were props, but they weren't secured in anything that, should there be some kind of rocking of the ship, all this stuff is going to spill over, and you don't know what kind of reaction it's going to cause.
He already had an
It's
accident
weird.
earlier in the episode where he spilled stuff, and
Yeah.
he had to have like a container thing go up to prevent
So
it
it just-
from being a bigger problem.
That's the only part of the episode that seemed like it was tacked on as a convenient nod to pay attention to this, people, to drive the story a little bit. Maybe, I don't know. It just didn't set with me.
I have an additional question, which is like, how ridiculous do you think the name Starfall is for a sword?
Starfall?
Yeah,
It sounds a little too close to Skyfall, the Bond movie, for me.
sword used by Ortega's character.
Well, it does seem ridiculous, and maybe they needed to give it something so that the audience would say that's weird, and then get mocked, right? She gets mocked for it, and then do they understand the tension between the two characters, right? But yeah, it does seem a little bit, but maybe it served a purpose, just like those chemicals on the desk.
Yeah,
They
Game
were
of Thrones
kinda-
is definitely better at naming swords.
Mhm. They had a little bit of time to build a world, and I think they tried their best to do that as much as they could. I think that messed with the pacing a little bit, but I respect what they were going for.
They could have just said Iron Tribble. They could have done, like Shatner's hairpiece. I mean, they could have done anything, really.
Does anyone else think it's odd that we see the book's cover where it's called The Kingdom of Elysian, and later in the episode where Mabenga says the book is called The Elysian Kingdom? So there's a bit of a discrepancy there.
Actors not knowing their lines.
The script continuity editor said fell asleep on the job for this episode.
Yeah.
But I do like the fact that the Elysian
lot.
Fields are kind of a nod. It's kind of a nod to the Elysian Fields in Greek mythology. So I actually appreciated the reference.
Mm-hmm. I think that he's read the book enough times to remember the title. He should know this book by heart. It doesn't look like a huge volume or something that he's only picked up occasionally. He's read this to his daughter every day. So I think he should know the title. So I agree with Dan. That's a strange thing to not pay attention to.
That editor had one job. One job.
What did you think, Scott?
I think it was just they had a few episode titles along the way already that were along that same line. It was Children of the Comet and Ghosts of Illyria. So if they had renamed it to, it might have seemed too similar if they'd renamed it in line with the book, so that the episode is actually titled The Kingdom of of Elysian. Yeah.
So
But again, that might have been like an 11th hour decision. Then they didn't realize, oh, wait a minute, that's not how it looks. Or we got to change the book. We don't have time.
fair. So out of 5 pips, what does everybody think about this episode? I think as much as this was fun, I think the ending and certain continuity issues and some very convenient things made this a 3 pipper for me. I think this is 3.
Wow.
2.5 from me.
Harsh.
I'm giving it a 4. I'm only taking 1 off for the continuity issues. because the entire episode was super fun, and they kind of had to end the story the way they did because, again, this is Strange New Worlds. This is not Discovery. You don't want to have a draggy ending. You don't want to have another bad ending after a child already was put through misery in a previous episode. So I think it ended the only way it could. So I'm going to give it a full 4.
I think there were a lot of episodes that I really enjoyed prior to this that this episode reminded me of. Like, is it called Child's Play and Voyager? I can't remember, the one with Flotter. And even the child, and quite a few different episodes that I really like. I really like the ending of this episode.
Yeah, that reminds me of something else I was going to say, that it also reminded me of the episode Masks from The Next Generation because of the transformation of the ship. I could definitely see that.
Yeah, I had a few, as I've already mentioned, there are a few things that kind of caused me to fall out of the episode for a bit, kind of made me wonder what the hell was going on. And even after 3 viewings, I still can't watch that moment. Okay, I'm just going to be honest. The last 2 viewings that I had, right, number 2 and number 3, I sped through Mabenga on that chemical mixing scene. I just went, I don't need to see that again. I don't need that. It's just a waste. So, but aside from that, I liked a lot of the things they were doing, and I even liked the playfulness of it. It was like they weren't taking themselves so seriously, and it was meant to be a child's vision of the way things were, and it was, I think, successful. So I'm going to give it a 4.
Okay, so I thought this episode balanced tones really well because, when it starts off, I was laughing harder than I did at anything in Spock Amok, which was the funniest episode up until this point. And then I was swept up in the adventure and the fantastical storytelling. And then right at the end, without it seeming forced or jarring, they turned around and basically ripped my heart out when Mbega had to give up his daughter. That's the only part that I actually have an issue with because, yeah, Brad, you mentioned I have kids, right? So I was, obviously commiserating with Mbenga as his daughter disappeared. But then she turns up again 5 seconds later, like, it's okay, Dad, I grew up and I've been having all these adventures and you were right to do this. I'm not one, like, I wouldn't want someone to wallow in their grief, but I think it would have helped with the flow of the episode, like the emotional flow. If that scene had happened, say, in Mbenga's office after he finished his supplemental log entry, and just to add a little more weight to it, if she had shown up in that same chair where he had been reading to her all this time. Yeah. But despite that, that's really not enough to take away from my overall opinion of the episode. And since we can't, well, if it did, but we don't do half pips, I got to give it a 5.
Wow. You're right. I think Scott, I think that would have been those choices about having her appear on that chair sometime later, right? Would have been beautiful. Would have been a beautiful moment.
Right? I think like when the girl comes back as an adult, it sort of interrupts what I would have preferred that not happen personally. I think that kind of sucked out the ability to sort of have Mbenga process what happened, but no, we're getting like a very neat and tidy, oh, she's great, and it was a moment for you, a lifetime for me. I wasn't into that personally.
Wouldn't they all be really messed up if Cybok and this entity were to join forces? Wow.
Dan, how many pips do you give this?
Oh, I already gave mine 2.5.
Sorry. 5.
No, no, I said 2.5.
2.5, sorry.
2.5, 3.
2.5. All right.
4 and
so
5.
You're very divided. You're very divided about this. Anyway, thanks to the panelists for joining this discussion. We hope you, our viewers, have enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments section what you thought about this episode of Strange New Worlds. Please remember to like and subscribe to the video, and we'll see you next time. Trek you later.